Hi, friends. Before we jump into today's show, which is going to be an amazing conversation with our guest, Andrew McPeak, Jen and I wanted to say a quick hello. So we're going to take just 5 minutes here. And before we jump into today's content, we wanted to just give you a quick response to listener questions because we get these questions and sometimes we don't have an opportunity to respond to them. So, Jen, welcome back. And for any listeners who are new to the show, let me just say this is William D. Parker and Dr. Jen Schwanke from Principal Matters, the podcast. And you can go back to more than 400 episodes and listen to all kinds of great content. Today's question, Jen, that I'm going to just ask us to sit on for the next now 4 minutes and 30 seconds. How do you coach a veteran teacher who's relatively effective, but who's reluctant to implement something new? How would you respond to that question?
Right. We could do a whole episode on this, but since we have probably 4 minutes and 12 seconds now, let's keep this short. I'm going to answer it by telling you about a conversation I had recently with a principal in Michigan. And she said, I've got this teacher who got really, really, really upset about a discipline issue. This kid had been throwing gummy bears across the cafeteria, and the teacher was furious. A veteran teacher, very effective, like disproportionately upset. And I said to the principal, well, it's not about the gummy bears. It's about something much deeper. And so to answer this question, I'm going to say to coach a veteran who's reluctant, you have to find out why the reluctance, because it's probably not about the initiative or the topic or the program, whatever you're trying to do to create some change. It's probably not about that, but it's about fear, right? Or it's about, I don't think this is going to make a difference. There's a reason that I'm reluctant. And I think that's the key, is to get to the why and then fix that problem rather than try to eliminate gummy bears.
Oh, I love that. I'll just add this thought because I'm thinking, of course, in my own mind too, of case studies of times that you and I have been in the room with these people. Maybe we were those people, but I'm thinking particularly of a veteran teacher who was really reluctant on some of the new initiatives happening in the department, a department around professional learning communities, because this teacher had worked independently for so long. What I discovered was um, the importance of surrounding that veteran teacher with eager and effective teachers as models.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no guarantee that's going to work. There's no guarantee that there still won't be friction. But whenever you see someone who's being reluctant, sometimes they need a friend at the elbow who's doing that work effectively and eagerly, who can model for them a way that it can be done, and it can be done successfully, and it can be done and you still retain your joy in
Right.
doing it. And so now I will say this, I've also seen some teachers who are willing to adapt and accept that change. And then I've had some teachers who just decided, I no longer really want to do this profession because this makes me too uncomfortable to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say to leaders, and maybe this is a good way to wrap up this short little segment. I always say to leaders, our responsibility as leaders is to, of course, help and support the people under our care, but it's also for someone who's reluctant to give yourself permission to keep them uncomfortable until they can adapt the change, or they decide maybe it's a time to go somewhere else, because
Right.
giving up and just allowing them to stay comfortable with the place where is not helping kids, or with the status quo, or with lack of growth, is a disservice to students. Now it's easy to
Right.
say that,
Right.
when so add your
Right.
final thought.
So we're out of time, but I do think it's important to reinforce the point about surrounding that veteran effective teacher with others, because sometimes that person needs to see a deeper why, needs to see inspiration, needs to have a different perspective. And I think that that's, oh, a lot of veteran teachers are tired and they're cynical. They've seen things come and go. They don't want to do it again, right? And that's fair. And so to bring in someone at their elbow gives them a little bit more of incentive rather than, hey, you should do this. So I love that question. Thank you.
Well, there's so much more we could add to that. And I'm not
Right.
going to ignore the leader who's out there going, yeah, but you don't know my teachers, or
Right.
you don't know what do we do when if we
Mhm.
make people uncomfortable and they leave, we can't find someone to replace them. I'll just say, yes, I understand that's a concern
Yes.
too. And I do want to point you back to a previous episode. Go back into the archives and look up Principal Matters podcast with Bo Brannon, Beau Brannon, Brannon, who spends a whole episode talking about how he recruits and retains high quality staff because he wants to hold on to the best people. And so there are leaders out there that are addressing these questions with those contexts in mind. And he's the current amazing leader here in the Tulsa area that was a guest on the show. Jen, thank you for answering
Thank
that
you.
question. Listeners, if you want to connect with either Jen or me, you can reach out to me at my email address at will@williamdparker.com. And Jen, how can they connect with you?
They can find me at jenschwanke.com or email me at jen@jenschwanke.com.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank
And
you.
Principal Matters listeners, we hope you enjoyed today's show with Andrew McPeak. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 409. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas. And this week, we're going to be talking about Ready for Real Life with my special guest, Andrew McPeak. Andrew McPeak is an author, researcher, communicator on emerging generations. From public school hallways to the boardrooms of corporate America, Andrew has honed an intimate understanding of the issues today's young leaders face. Leveraging his experience and insights, Andrew works to give adults practical tools and actionable advice for leading today's youngest population. Andrew is the author of 3 books, including Marching Off the Map, Generation Z Unfiltered, and his latest, Ready for Real Life, unpacking the 5 essential skills great leaders instill in their students. Andrew McPeak, welcome back to Principal Matters Podcast because you are a returning guest. And why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Yeah, Will, thank you so much for the return invitation. I consider it a great honor. I love you and I love your work. And so it's just, it's really great to be a part of that. Let's see, on top of working for Growing Leaders, getting to write and speak, I get to do a lot of really fun focus groups with middle school, high school, and college age students. And then I'll throw this out there. I am also a fan of 2 college teams that don't feel connected very often, but my family are all big Alabama fans, and my wife's family are all big Iowa fans. So I root for 2 very different parts of the country. That's another little fun fact about me.
Well, if listeners could see you like I do through this video conversation, they would see the black hat with the big white eye on top of it, because you just got to go to a game recently, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I got to see Caitlin Clark. I think as we record this, she's working on a record, but by the time people are listening to this, she'll be well into the record books. And she is a remarkable player. So we got to go see an Iowa women's basketball team game, and it was incredible. So
Well, Principal Matters listeners, I want you to know Andrew and I have been friends for a long time. Through this work, we met through our mutual friend, Tim Elmore, Dr. Tim Elmore from Growing Leaders in Atlanta, Georgia. We've been at events together. You've hosted events I've been at. I've hosted events you've been at.
yeah,
We have sat down together for meals and good drinks and just talked and shared. And so I'm so excited to bring you into this conversation today, Andrew, because I've had a copy of Ready for Real Life since you published it in 2023. And in fact, I even have a blurb on the front of it. And
you
yet,
do.
and yet I'm just now getting you in front of my audience. So first of all, apologies, my friend, that it's taken me this long to place you and your great resource in front of Principal Matters listeners. But let's talk about the book. And I want to back up a little bit. How did you start studying generations and speaking to students, teachers, administrators, and parents about generational trends emerging?
Yeah, the original journey actually started back in college. So even as a college student, I was thinking, boy, it's really interesting, my generation and the things we do and how different we are, and in particular, wondering how is it that older, wiser folks could better connect with people like me. So I was already thinking about that even as I was a part of that. And I came across a book called Generation IY, written by none other than Dr. Tim Elmore. And he published that back in 2010. I think I read it in 11 and was just blown away by um, the wisdom that he was bringing to the table. And really, generational studies is an art and a science. Almost anybody who's in it would tell you that, meaning that just because you fit in a certain range of birth doesn't mean you're exactly as we describe you. But what I love so much about the conversation is really generational studies is about empathy, it's about understanding, and it's about connection. And boy, aren't those things that the things that we need most in our world right now, with so much division, so much strife. And when we get into generations, really, it's a conversation about our own um, our own need to look into ourselves and go, where am I making assumptions about people just because of the way they look or the age they are, or any of those kinds of things. And so from the beginning, that's really what I was in love with. And when I came to Growing Leaders in 2015, I never dreamed that I was going to get to write books with Tim. And we even put out, he was writing on Generation IY about the millennials. I could not have dreamed as I was reading that book in 2010, 2011, that he and I would put out a book on Generation Z in 2019. That was a dream. So it's just been a wild ride to get to talk about this stuff, spend time with students, and turn those conversations into insights for educators and leaders all over the world.
You said 3 words there. Repeat those.
Empathy, understanding, and connection.
Mm. That's so important because you've spent a lot of time listening to students. You do a lot of around the table conversations with students, middle schoolers, high schoolers. And I know that for those of us who have worked with students for so long, that there are some common traits about their development stages, some of the things that they've said over the years. But as you've been having those conversations with students, what are some things that you've been hearing that have helped you transition those into the skills that you think are so important in this book?
Yeah. A lot of things I'll mention will be things, if you're an educator who's around kids every day, you go, yep. As we look at Generation Z, that would be the kids born since the turn of the 21st century. They have grown up in a world with recession. They have grown up in a world with political division and strife. They've grown up in a world with social media. They've grown up in a world with COVID, right? And now we're in a post-COVID world. So some of the characteristics we're seeing are things like anxiousness, which we started seeing the anxiety epidemic sort of sprout really in 2015, 16 was when people really started noticing it in the research. Post-COVID, the thing everybody's talking about is, yes, anxiousness is still around, but really loneliness is the thing that we're seeing more than ever right now. One thing we wrote a lot about was privacy. I think this generation is a little more private than the millennials, if you looked at them. So that's beginning to change as TikTok is pushing more kids to be viral rather than vanishing as Snapchat was. But I think that's a characteristic. I'm also seeing a higher levels of creativity in these kids. That's a kind of a positive trend. So, not just the consumerist mindset, but also the creative mindset, which I really love. And the other thing we're noticing is just a decrease in trust. This would be trust in traditional institutions, trust in adults who are put in front of me without a relationship. So whether it's that brand new teacher I have at the beginning of the semester, or a coach on my athletic team, a pastor at a church, whomever it is, kids just have a much less degree of trust, and which makes sense growing up in a 21st century world where everybody's saying, everybody's sharing an opinion and asking for your information. I think kids just trust a little bit less automatically. So there's a lot of paradoxes, right? Today's kids are more connected than ever, but say in surveys that they feel more alone and lonely than ever. Kids are growing up as digital natives, and yet in a lot of ways we see them being digitally naive, right? making some really interesting choices online. They're the most empowered kids we've ever met, and yet they seem to be paralyzed and frozen in decision making. And then, they're very, very savvy about how to navigate some of the world, especially the digital world, but we're seeing high degrees of cynicism and a lack of trust. And so these really interesting characteristics that often go together, that feel like, why are both of these things happening at the same time? And honestly, the more time you spend with them, the more these seeming paradoxes start to make sense when you look at what it would be like to grow up in the world they're growing up in.
Well, there's so much wisdom in that, Andrew. And I've had this conversation with other educators, other parents, where we've talked about, and I know you've had these same conversations, which is for those of us that are in the generation of older adults who are trying to mentor and empower students, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but what may have worked for us doesn't always mean it's going to work for them.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they're also realizing, like, the world that you were able to craft or navigate, whether that's systems or environments or cultures or economies or whatever, may not be the same formula that's going to work for me in this
Yeah.
generation and in this time that we live in, which is why I'm really grateful that in this book you focus instead on not necessarily what they need to do, but the soft skills that they need to develop in order to really survive in whatever setting or
Yes,
whatever
exactly.
pathway they end up on. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we talked a lot about growing leaders, about the difference between timely and timeless, right? There are movements and ideas and concepts that come along, and you just sort of know automatically this is a fad, right? It's going to be around for a couple of years, and then the district is going to drop it and we're going to move on to something else. But then there are things where, as you're having that conversation with a student about this math concept, right? Or in this case, a soft skill where, man, this thing that I'm teaching them right now, they are going to need for the rest of their life. And I think a big reason why kids today often distrust adults is they feel like adults spend so much time telling them things that aren't actually relevant to their life. And so I sort of became obsessed with, well, if you had to break down what the essential elements are, the things that are timeless, that are never going to change, what would those things be? Luckily for me, there's a whole lot of much smarter people who have already done that research. And really what I wanted to do is take all of that research and sort of put the cookies on the bottom shelf for us to understand it. So just practically speaking, I think kids need skills today because we're seeing a lack of ownership in kids today more than ever. Take a very passive approach to their education, to their future, to their daily schedules and weekly schedules, all because adults are really doing a lot of that stuff for them. It's creating what social scientists and psychologists have called an external locus of control, or this belief that internally to them, this belief that really it's the forces outside of me that have the most input into the way my life is going to go. And that's kind of creating this passiveness to them. And I really love to see that start to shift. I also think kids today are headed for jobs, careers, and hard skills that we cannot anticipate today. I mean, if you just look at how quickly artificial intelligence has changed the game in so many industries. I'm already talking with folks who are going, you know what, this entire industry may be gone in 5 years because of how fast artificial intelligence is taking its place. And as we look at a world that's changing that quickly, I think we also have to acknowledge as educators that we're preparing kids for jobs that don't exist. And that's been true for decades. That's more true today even than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And so how do you get a kid ready for a job that doesn't exist? You give them a skill that's going to be required no matter what the job is. And then, I reference this, but the final thing I would say on the importance of soft skills is more and more and more and more research is showing that soft skills, skills like empathy, delayed gratification, grit, some of those skills are better predictors of overall success in life than any hard skill that we could teach them. And when that is true, how could we not acknowledge that that should be a part of the equation? I call the book Ready for Real Life because I would say the goal of every school, when it comes down to it, is to get their kids ready. Ready for certainly possibly a 4-year degree that they might chase after they finish school, but also ready for the workplace, and hopefully ready for relationships, both with peers, with a possible spouse, with the other adults who are out there in the world. And I would just say, if our goal is to get kids ready for real life, then shouldn't we acknowledge that soft skills are a part of that equation? And that was the other big driving force behind the book.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. Research across 45 states showed that IXL schools outperform other schools on state tests. With IXL, you get a personalized online learning and teaching solution that helps you improve achievement, empower teachers, track progress, and more. This one platform for K-12 helps teachers accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically adapts to ensure each learner is always supported and challenged at the right level. IXL also provides every student with a personalized learning plan to help them close knowledge gaps effectively. One of my favorite things about IXL is their personalized test prep tool. For exams like the SAT and ACT, IXL will analyze a student's most recent score and generate a custom list of skills to help them boost their scores. If you want to take the load off of your teachers so they can do their best work, IXL can help. Learn more at IXL.com/PM today. So let's sit here for just a moment, Andrew, because I want to reflect on some of the things you said. Thank you for that summary. And I know, because I have a copy of your book, that when you break down those skills into those soft skills you're talking about into those 5 categories, you list them as 1, self-awareness, 2, self-management, 3, decision-making, 4, relationship management, and 5, social awareness.
Yeah.
And so first, I want to just say what I don't hear you saying, just to be clear with listeners. What I don't hear you saying is that we need to ignore hard skills.
Absolutely.
Because we still need to have students who can read, think with critically, speak and write eloquently, calculate correctly, analyze scientifically, all of those hard skills that are really important,
of course,
for the work. But what I do hear you saying is that without the soft skills, the hard skills aren't really going to be able to be applied. And I'm going to use this word wisely. In other words, in a lot of ways, these soft skills are helping students step into how do you wisely navigate the world that you live in. And wisdom isn't something that usually is caught. We in some ways we can teach wisdom, and in other ways we have to learn it through hard experience. So this is the follow-up question I have for you, Andrew, which is, and I know you do this in the book, but you also do this in your work. What are some ways that we can help students develop that kind of wisdom, develop those kinds of skills, even in the school setting, which is often so focused on those hard skills?
Yeah. I think there's a number of, the word that's used in this space is intervention, right? So there's a number of interventions that you can use. Obviously, having a program or some sort of intentional effort, or even a curriculum that helps to build this. And, at Growing Leaders, we have a tool called Habitudes we've been using for decades and decades that builds soft skills. That's what it does. And by the way, when we use the term soft skills, it has a wide variety of applications, and state to state, even you'll hear different terms used. So some states use life skills or soft skills. Other states will call it social and emotional learning, which is a bad word in other states. I'll hear career readiness. I'll hear character education. I'll hear all those kinds of things. When you look at the core of what we're talking about, it's all very similar. But an intentional program like our Habitudes program, that's just one of many that's out there that you can use during advisement or homeroom, is a really great way to begin that conversation. But, Dr. Adam Sands wrote a great book called The EQ Intervention. And he said the best absolute best soft skill intervention that you could possibly do is a teacher or an adult in their life who's modeling the way. And I would say if you're not doing anything related to soft skill development, the first thing I would focus on is just asking, what are the behaviors that the adults in my school are doing that are helping to model some of these positive soft skills? So how are teachers showing self-awareness? How are teachers managing themselves? How are teachers making responsible decisions? All those kinds of things. To me, that's where a lot of it begins, is in that conversation. And by the way, I've been in schools where they have a really robust program, but the teachers aren't modeling it. And I'll walk in a classroom and the teachers will go, all right, they're making me do this habitudes thing or whatever. And I'm sitting in the back of the room thinking, this is not going to work because we're not modeling.
I'm just so glad you said that. And I'm going to just take a moment right now, because whenever I start thinking about how adults aren't modeling those things, I have to immediately hold the mirror up to myself.
Yeah.
Ask, how am I not modeling those things? So where in my own work, and Principal Matters listeners, I'm asking you to do the same thing. Where in our own work may we need to develop better self-awareness, better self-management, better responsible decision-making, better relationship management, and better social awareness? Because these are skills that all of us need, Andrew. I'm so glad you said that. If we're not modeling it, then there's no way these students are going to receive instruction from us about it. Why don't you take one of these areas, and I don't care if it's social awareness or self-management or decision-making, and let's dig down a little bit and just talk to me about, if you were working with a student in one of these soft skills, what are some things that you would want to explain, or where would you want to dig in order to help students understand why this is an important area for them?
Yeah. Well, as I said, my goal was to take research that's already being done and kind of put the cookies on the bottom shelf. So these ideas, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, all those things come from other organizations. Probably the most well-known of them is CASEL, C-A-S-E-L, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning. And they have this wheel with these 5 core competencies and 31 sub-competencies and all of that. But frankly, the average teacher in a classroom, that's a lot to have to think about when I'm also thinking about, my math class, as well as helping out in the cafeteria and working the bus line, right? I don't want to add this whole other area. So my goal is to simplify it. And each of these 5 skills I actually tied to a tool. And I thought of it almost like, imagine your students walking down the hallway, they've got their backpack on. What are the tools you want to put in that backpack that they can readily pull out and access, that they're going to need as they step out into the quote unquote real world? And so the 5 tools that they're going to need are a mirror, a map, a compass, a two-way radio, and a passport. And each one of those sort of aligns with one of these core values. So just as an example, I'll talk about the mirror. The mirror to me is the skill of self-awareness. So I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but have you ever walked into a bathroom, Will, at like maybe 10:30, 11 in the morning, and you look in the mirror and you go, oh no, how long have I looked like this, right? Maybe your hair is disheveled, or you put your shirt on backwards that day, or there's something in your teeth, right? But it's that feeling of self-realization where you're going, oh my gosh, there's something that's true about me that I didn't acknowledge before. And what that mirror is doing is it's telling you the truth about yourself, right? So imagine the same scenario, only for whatever reason, you walk into that bathroom and there is no mirror. They never installed one. You would walk out just as oblivious as you were before, right? That doesn't change the truth about that disheveled look that's going on that morning. Instead, it's the difference there is self-awareness. And that's what a mirror is. It would be great if all of us could go around in our lives and be surrounded by people who would serve as our mirror, who would tell us the truth about ourselves. But I have found, and I'm sure you have found as well, Will, that we don't have a lot of people who are willing to do that, right? It's a very rare, close friendship, maybe a spouse even, who is willing to go, you know what, you're acting kind of like a jerk today, or whatever it is. And frankly, the higher up in the power structure that you are inside of an organization like a school, the less you're going to have people around you who are going to help you become self-aware. And what I'm seeing is a whole lot of adults and students who are walking around, they've got something in their teeth, metaphorically speaking, and nobody's saying it to them. And so that's why I think the skill we need to help kids develop is to learn to be their own mirror, is to start to self-realize. So you've probably had this moment too, where you're in a meeting, having a conversation, and you stop for a second and go, man, I was really kind of a jerk there. Or, wow, I feel some emotion going on inside of me. I feel upset about something, and I wonder where that's coming from. Um, or you respond or react in a specific situation, and you just kind of had one of those moments where it's almost like you're seeing yourself from outside of your body. That skill is called self-awareness. The ability to do that is massive. And I don't have to tell you, we are walking around. There's a whole lot of people walking around without self-awareness these days who have no idea how they're coming across. So this metaphor of a mirror is a great conversation to have with your kids, with the students in your classroom, to just go, if you had to describe how you just acted in the classroom today, what word would you use? And to see just how aware they are of their own selves, and then talk to them about it like a mirror. From time to time, you just need to look into the mirror of your personality, the mirror of your behaviors, and ask some questions. And I get very practical in that chapter on the book, but that's kind of the big idea behind each of these tools.
Andrew, this is so good. I'm going to ask you to keep going. Pick another area, because what a great way to connect self-awareness to an illustration, something
Yeah.
that you can use to really help yourself and others see the importance of that. So take us through another analogy.
Okay, I'll do one that's so that's self-awareness is really um, it's an intrapersonal competency. So it's, looking inside of yourself. So I'll talk about one of the interpersonal competencies, the two-way radio. So if you've ever, they're often called walkie-talkies, right? But if you've ever been on a real two-way radio, the one with the channels and all of that stuff, you know how that thing works. That's another tool that you have to learn to use. There's really two things to know in using a two-way radio, and I think they're the same two things to know in building and developing relationships with other people. First, if you want to communicate with somebody, you have to be on the same channel with them, right? The same wavelength, so to speak. So if I'm trying to talk to you and I'm on channel 1 and you're on channel 3, it really doesn't matter the quality of our conversation. We're not going to hear one another. And I've been in conversations with people before who don't know how to get on my wavelength. So I make a comment to them, and then they make a comment back as if they didn't hear a single thing I said. They're in their own world. There's a lot of young people today who only seem to be able to play or communicate in their own space, their own areas of interest, and they haven't learned to adapt to or get on the same wavelength as the conversation or the people around them. And so that's what I would say. First is, do you have the ability to adapt in conversation? The other skill to know with a two-way radio is you can't talk and listen at the same time, right? That's one of the beautiful things about a radio. And in order to leverage this tool in an effective way in a situation where I can't talk and listen at the same time, you actually develop a language of communication. So you say things like over to let them know, I'm done talking, I'm ready to listen to you. And I think great communicators do that in the same way. So the two-way radio is about adapting to the world around you, and it's about learning to listen really well before you speak. And what a great set of skills that kids need to have if they want to build better relationships with the people around them.
Andrew, this is so rich. I don't want to stop. So I'm going to ask you, pick another one of
Okay.
those examples for us and walk us through that.
Okay, so let's do the compass. The compass is the skill of responsible decision making. We, I think, live in a GPS world, right? So I love a GPS. It gets me exactly where I want to go, really easy to punch it in. But the reality is a GPS is only functional if a couple of conditions are met. You have to know where you are, you have to know where you're going, and there have to be paved roads in between, right? So if I possess a GPS, but I'm dropped into, for instance, the middle of the wilderness where there are no roads and where I don't know where I am, how do I get direction, right? That GPS is basically a brick. And for a lot of kids, they're growing up in a world that's getting turn-by-turn instructions their whole life, right? Moms and dads, teachers, principals, coaches, leaders of all kinds say, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that, turn in this assignment, be here on Friday, show up to this. And I think one of the challenges of adulthood for young people today is that they've been given a GPS their entire life. Then they graduate, they go out into the wilderness of adulthood and they have no idea how to make decisions, which is why I think the better skill to give them is a compass. A compass gives you direction no matter where you are on the planet, because it always points towards magnetic north. So to me, the skill of the compass, the skill to help kids make better decisions and learn to make better decisions even earlier in life, is helping them figure out, where is your north? What is your direction? I think your compass is made up of your own personal values. And there are a lot of kids who get all the way to adulthood and they have no idea, what do I value? What do I care about? And so I suggest a few exercises in the chapter, but I think really we need to help students figure out, what kind of person am I going to be no matter what situation I am in? And if I've decided I'm going to be a kind person, for instance, that's one of my values, then even if I'm in the wilderness of adulthood, I've got direction, right? I'm not exactly sure I'm going to navigate this, but I know no matter what, I'm going to be kind in all situations. I have my own personal set of values, and whenever I'm in foggy situations, those things give me direction and help me know how I want to conduct myself. So I think that's just a really great skill for kids to have as they're trying to make more responsible decisions for themselves.
All right, let's do one more. And
Okay.
because I just can't stop. I want you to do talk about the passport. How's that?
Okay, yeah. The passport is great. This is probably the most complex one, but frankly, I think it's actually the most complex skill, which is social awareness. We talk about social awareness as you have to learn to read yourself and to read other people, right? That's self-awareness and relationship management. But I think you also need to learn to read the air. If you've ever stepped into a room and you immediately know, people seem angry in this room, or people seem excited and anticipatory in this room, you can almost feel the room. I think that's what social awareness is. So if you think about a passport and what a passport does, I think the passport is the tool that helps you know how to conduct yourself in any given social situation. So in just a couple of weeks, I'm actually going on an international trip. And I know that the whole time I'm on that trip, that passport is going to be close to me on my person, because the more different the territory I'm in, the more important it's going to be that I keep my passport close. A passport is made up of two fundamental things. There's the part that's in the front of the passport, and that is what I would call your inherited identity. Your inherited identity in the front of your passport is all the things about yourself you did not get to choose, right? You did not choose your birth date. You did not choose how you look. You did not choose your country of origin. All of that information is stuff that was chosen for you. You arrived and they said, here you are, right? But what's interesting is there's another part of your passport, which is all of those pages following that you get to put stamps in, right? And I think of those pages as your adopted identity. Because I get to choose where I go, what countries I visit, the places I go, the experiences I have. And as I go, I get more and more stamps in my passport. I actually just had to update my passport. It was so full of stamps from the places I had been that it represented all of the experiences that I had had. And I can look back over those stamps in that passport and go, oh man, I remember what it was like to be there. I remember this experience I had there. And each of us, as we think about how we interact with the world around us, we consider those two things: the inherited identity I have, the pieces about me that I don't get to choose, where I'm from, the family I grew up in, the siblings I had, and how my parents treated me when I was growing up, my race and my gender, and all of those things. And then I have my adopted identity, the experiences I have, the choices I make, and those two things come together and make up how I interact with the world around me, the thing that we call social awareness.
Andrew, this is I could keep you going, I know, but I want listeners to realize all of this amazing content is available in this book. And so, Principal Matters listeners, right now, I want you to either write down this title or open up a browser and look for Ready for Real Life: Unpacking the 5 Essential Soft Skills Great Leaders Instill in Their Students by Andrew McPeak, and get a copy of this book. But Andrew, there's also another way they can engage with this content, which is by having you work with teachers and leaders. And so can you talk a little bit about that work? Because By the way, thank you. This has been so golden. I feel like I'm like all of us right now are just getting free professional development from Andrew McPeak for these wonderful analogies and useful tools. So tell us a little bit about what could leaders expect if they bring you in to work with their students, and what are some ways folks can stay connected with that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, at Growing Leaders, we offer professional development for teachers and school administrators, and then we also do events with students, which we have obviously so much fun doing. Our driving value on those is to be pracademic. We make up our own words around Growing Leaders sometimes. So we certainly want to be academically rigorous. We read a lot, and we spend a lot of time with people who are much, much smarter than us. But our goal as communicators is really to turn those academic concepts into practical insights. And that's what we do in every one of those professional development sessions. So I spend a large part of my year traveling around the country and sometimes even around the world, leading sessions with adults and leaders. And then we've got a great team of communicators alongside of me. So if folks wanted to find out more about that, or even have me come talk about some of the ideas in Ready for Real Life, why it's so essential that we need to be having conversations about soft skills. I know a lot of schools I go, and this is one of the driving reasons behind the book, a lot of schools I go to, they've heard they need to talk about soft skills, but there's not an understanding on campus as to why this is so important. And so this conversation, I kind of put wind in the sails of the administration who's going, man, I really want to do this, but I need to get my teachers on board. And so a lot of my conversations with staff and doing professional development are really about that ultimately. So if you wanted to find out more about that, you can go to growingleaders.com and click on professional development, or you can find out specifically about me at andrewmcpeak.com, and you can click on speaking there, and that'll also take you to our Growing Leaders team. We have a phenomenal team who will help you get exactly what you're looking for in your professional development.
Well, Andrew, as we wrap up, I do want to ask you one more question about something that you talk about at the end of this book, and that is leading when you feel like leaving. So
Yeah.
could you speak to that? Because I know a lot of educators, leaders, we're recording this in the middle of a school year, but we're going to be listening to this sometime in August. And I know a lot of schools I'm working with have seen huge exodus of people that
Yeah.
are coming in and out. So talk, as you wrap up, share a little bit of your heart about how to lead even when you feel like leaving.
Yeah, I put it as a chapter near the end of the book, and it wasn't originally the plan. And I actually wrote that in the chapter. When I laid out this book, this was not a part of the plan. But what happened is I was spending so much time with teachers, so much time with school leaders who were going, yeah, kids. But what I really need you to talk to me about is, how do I help my teachers? The rates of burnout, um, frustration, resignation, all of that kind of stuff are hitting them. What's interesting, though, is that the original Great Resignation that everybody talked about in kind of 2021, 2022, that actually didn't hit the educational industry at first, which was a really interesting stat that we were all kind of watching, those of us who are working with schools regularly, and wondering why that is. Well, there was all of these reporters and folks who were spending time with teachers to try and figure out, why wasn't the Great Resignation hitting teachers? I think it kind of is retroactively now. But I think the original reason why it didn't hit us at first is the same reason as why I think that we have a chance to turn things around. I'll never forget reading this amazing article where they were interviewing a teacher who had really, really struggled through the pandemic, even had to take a leave of absence because of her own bout of COVID that was really, really bad, but came back to the classroom. And when they interviewed her and asked her, why is it that you came back, because so many of your colleagues are not? And she said, I realized that I have a choice in this matter. I can choose to go to a different school, or I can choose to change my career and do something different. But I realized that while I have choice, my students do not. And that they're in a place where they're going to kind of get whatever is given to them, especially if you're a leader in a public school. And for her, that connected to something that was at her core, something that I talk about in this chapter, Leading When You Feel Like Leaving. I call it Find Your Why, right? And so many people have talked about why am I doing this? But I think the further in our careers that we go, and the more challenging that it becomes for me to do my role, the easier it is for me to get disconnected with the original reason I set out on this journey to begin with, right? So if somebody listening to this is leading a teacher who's maybe in their 40s, right? They've been teaching for possibly 20 years at this point. It would be very easy, if you look at from where they began their career to where they are now, it would be very easy for them to feel completely disconnected from that original reason that they set off. And so one of the suggestions I make in this chapter is, I think we all need to go back and interview our 20-something self and ask that person who, yes, was naive for sure, but I think they had a better connection with their why, and why drives what every single time. And so if we're looking for a reason, or we're looking for motivation behind, why should I keep in this game? Why should I keep pushing forward? Where am I going to find my joy from in the work that I'm doing now? I think the joy that or the location of your joy is going to be found in the same place it was found when you started your career in your 20s, which is the reason why you got out of bed in the morning. For most educators, I think it's going to be about the students, right? That twinkle in their eyes, they get something for the first time, or that joy that they get as they say thank you at the end of the semester, whatever that is. But I think all of us need to go back and interview our 20-something self, whether that's reading an old journal or talking to our parents or other people who knew us back then, and getting reacquainted with who we were. And then for the principals out there, I think we have got to shift our focus certainly on helping students have an incredible experience inside of our schools and classroom culture and all of that stuff. But I think we also need to be talking more than we ever have about staff culture. How are we exhibiting a culture of care? Number one, care. We show that we care for people beyond just their outside world. Well, by the way, we're a nonprofit at Growing Leaders. When I do one-on-ones with my staff, we spend 45 minutes, so 75% of our hour-long one-on-one talking about how they're doing in their personal life, because I know work finds a way to take care of itself. Relationships do not. So we've got to have a culture of care where we spend extra time going, how are things going at home? What challenges are you facing? How could I help you? Can I introduce you to somebody? So care is number one. I think two is development, growth. Staff need to know that just because they've reached this point in their career, that does not mean there's nowhere else left for them to grow and develop themselves. I think inherent joy comes from the realization that I have room left to grow, right? I have areas left to develop myself. And so if you're thinking about how do I create a culture on my campus where my staff is thinking about leading, not leaving, I think it comes back to those two essential elements. How are we creating care, and how are we creating a culture of personal development and growth?
I am so glad I asked you that question, Andrew, because what a powerful way to wrap up this conversation. And Principal Matters listeners, as you're stepping into this season of school, your students are so important. You're remembering your why is also important, but also developing your staff and caring for them so that they can care for others. It's one of the reasons, Andrew, one of the things I love to do with schools, especially with principals and their teachers, is I come in and spend either, it can be 90 minutes, half a day, sometimes it's a full day of work on my book, Pause, Breathe, Flourish, which is just, let's take time and give each other permission to talk about those things in our lives that really affect who we are as people. And what I find is when people have permission to reflect on those things, then suddenly there's way more focus and intentionality in their work. You can't, one lends it to the other. So Andrew McPeak, this has been so rich. Thank you so much for the opportunity. What a wonderful book that you've created, Ready for Real Life, and what a great way to wrap up this conversation. Principal Matters listeners, I want you to reach out to Andrew McPeak at his website, andrewmcpeak.com, or you can find him in more professional development available at growingleaders.com. But Andrew, until next time, thank you, my friend. And Principal Matters, thank you for doing what matters. We'll see you next week. You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations for my books, as well as for Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.